Recently, I was rewatching one of my favorite movies of all time, Dil Chahta Hai. There are scenes in the movie that are shot all across Mumbai, including at the Pearl of the Orient, which is this iconic revolving restaurant at the Ambassador Hotel. Turns out, the movie is also a fascinating drive down memory lane and a window into what Mumbai was just 2 decades back or so. The movie came out in 2001 and it's almost unbelievable to see how much Mumbai has changed in these 23 years. Take a look at the skyline of Mumbai today. Now look at it around the time Dil Chahta Hai was released. It's hard to believe there's only 2 decades between these two visuals. Mumbai's development over these years isn't just relegated to shiny new buildings though. An entire network of roads, flyovers, long bridges like the Sea Link and Atal Setu have transformed the infrastructure in the city. The coastal road and metro projects have and will continue to improve connectivity in a profound way as well. As impressive as all these developments are, could they be dwarfed by what's in store for the city? Let's explore whether Mumbai is about to experience a redevelopment boom and who stands to gain from it. In this video, I will cover 3 topics related to the redevelopment boom: how redevelopment projects work, who stands to gain from these redevelopments, and which companies should play an important role in these projects. I will end though with a question that I want you, the audience, to answer. In the first chapter, I will walk you through the mechanics of redeveloping real estate and the multiple boxes that need to be checked before a project can take off. In the second chapter, we will look at how the different players involved in the process profit from a redevelopment project and the economic incentives for a project to be greenlit. Finally, in the third chapter, I will discuss some of the potential beneficiaries of this boom in the listed space in India. As always, nothing in this video or connected to this channel is investment advice, nor a recommendation to or not to buy, sell, or hold any security. A lot of work goes into making these videos. So please like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon. It really does help us. Also, let us know in the comments what you think of our videos. It helps us understand what content and topics are of interest to you. You can also find our channel and our podcast, The Krish Kothari Show, and many other interesting channels on a variety of important topics on the Zerodha Media Network. I've had no less than a dozen conversations in the last month, all with people who live in buildings where the societies have either agreed to or are seriously considering redevelopment. This may not seem like a big deal. After all, buildings are constantly built and rebuilt in large cities around the world. Now, consider my experience along with the following fact. Each of the people that I had those conversations with lives within a 3 or 4 kilometer radius. And if I know of a dozen cases, think of how many there must be in total. Mumbai's next big real estate boom may not come from new buildings, but from the redevelopment of existing buildings. And the opportunity is not lost on all the major players involved. For this to pan out, it will require tremendous effort from all parties involved. And as is inevitably the case, it may be a much bumpier ride than they hope. Let's first look at the mechanics of redevelopment and how the process plays out. Now, as you can imagine, the 2 main players in any redevelopment deal are the housing society and the redeveloper or builder. And as you can also imagine, I'm sure, the government will play a very important role in this entire process as well. The typical redevelopment model is for 1 or more housing societies to enter into an agreement with a builder to redevelop a building or group of buildings referred to as a cluster. The builder agrees to demolish an existing building or buildings and reconstruct another building or buildings in their place. The original members of the society will get flats in the reconstructed building, which flats will be materially larger than their original houses. Of course, the reconstructed building will also, very importantly, have many modern facilities and amenities, usually including a gym, swimming pool, and recreation area. In exchange for this, the society agrees to reserve a portion of the square footage of the reconstructed building for sale by the developer. This is a really important point to remember because this is where the builder makes his money. So as an example, if a building had 10,000 square feet of living space, the existing members of the society will be given 15,000 square feet in the reconstructed building, with the builder permitted to sell the entire square footage over and above the 15,000 square feet that is reserved for the existing members in the reconstructed building. If, and it is a big if, a housing society and a builder can agree on terms, redevelopment of a single building could be a multi-100 crore project. Now, imagine that multiplied by buildings across Mumbai, and you get a sense of the enormity of the potential boom. The reason I say it's a big if is that, first, a majority of the members of a society have to agree to the redevelopment. And even if they do agree to it, the society has to be able to agree on terms with a builder, which can be an incredibly challenging process. This process, though, has been made easier by a relatively recent regulatory change. As per this change, consent of only 51% of the members of a housing society is needed to go ahead with the redevelopment. This 51% number is really important to remember. Clearly, the government is happy to see the redevelopment of the city. And why wouldn't they? Think of the incredible revenue that can be generated from these projects for the government, as well as the increase in housing stock that will come about as a result of all of this redevelopment and the increase in the number of houses that are available for citizens and residents in the city. Now, I'm going to take a minute to talk about housing societies. Ask people their experiences dealing with or being part of housing societies, and generally the answers will range from annoying to outright torture. It's easy to imagine why as well. Dozens of different viewpoints, motivations, and financial situations are bound to cause disagreement and conflict, not to mention the inevitable politics that creep into such situations. Housing society politics can be quite entertaining, assuming, of course, you're not the one having to deal with it. 51% may be enough on paper, but not necessarily in reality. Builders may be wary of engaging in a redevelopment without a larger majority in favor of the project. It's in the builder's interest that a larger portion of the members of the housing societies are actually in favor of the redevelopment, so as to minimize the complications and risk of court cases that inevitably arise in such situations when there's meaningful resistance. At this stage, you're probably wondering why redevelopment has become significantly more popular than it was just a few years ago, even though the case for it has existed for many years. There's a few reasons for this. First, of course, is the regulatory change I just mentioned, which makes it possible to go ahead with a redevelopment project, even in the face of meaningful opposition from other members of the housing society. Second is that a building must be at least 30 years old before it is eligible for redevelopment. Mumbai is filled with buildings that were constructed between the 1970s and 1990s, including many large complexes of buildings. So a large number of buildings are now of an age where it makes sense to very seriously consider a do-over. Finally, a really important and meaningful standard of living shift has occurred in recent years. Today, everybody, understandably, wants to live in a building or a complex that offers a host of amenities. This is particularly important in a building like Mumbai, which has a really painful dearth of public recreational area, as well as access to clubs that have these facilities. As a result of all of this, buildings that do offer these amenities command materially higher prices. Ultimately, the success or failure of redevelopment across the city rests on one single factor. Does everybody involved get richer? Let's look at the developer first because it's much easier to understand. With proper execution, a builder can make dozens to hundreds of crores in profit in just a single redevelopment deal. It's no surprise then that builders are aggressively wooing societies with the greatest potential for redevelopment. The primary source of profit for a developer is the sale of the new flats created as a result of the redevelopment of a building. Additionally, builders are incentivized by regulations to engage in cluster redevelopment. Therefore, redevelopment of plots larger than 10,000 square meters should prove to be particularly profitable for builders. The more interesting piece, though, is the economic incentives for members of housing societies. Society members often stand to gain in multiple ways from a redevelopment if executed properly. The most obvious way they gain is living in a much larger house in a modern building with amazing amenities. Members of a society are typically given 1.5 times the space they owned prior to the redevelopment. So a member who had a 1,000 square foot flat prior to redevelopment will now live in a 1,500 square foot flat post reconstruction of the building. Just as importantly, the per square foot value should also increase. Therefore, the overall value of the flat should increase meaningfully post redevelopment. This is particularly important since for most people, their house represents the single largest component of their net worth. Now, redevelopment, even if done properly and efficiently, can take several years. As part of the agreement, the builder is required to pay each member of the society on a monthly basis to cover the cost of temporary accommodation while the redevelopment is completed. Broadly, this amount should be enough to cover the rent of a comparable flat in a comparable neighborhood in the city. As a corollary, if enough people need to rent houses in the same areas, it may materially affect the rental market in the city. But more on that later. There is also a one-time cost that builders have to pay members to cover the cost of moving over and above the rental cover. All these put together can prove to be a very lucrative proposition for most members of societies. You're probably thinking all this sounds fantastic and maybe even wondering why your society isn't considering redevelopment. The reason is that there are many stumbling blocks to redevelopment and many issues that could potentially crop up. The first and most obvious is the society and builder striking a deal. The bargaining power in such situations varies on a case-to-case basis, but in most instances, the negotiations will be long drawn and complicated. I suspect as well, many suits will be filed attempting to block redevelopment, even after an agreement has been signed. The second is reaching the magic 51% member consent threshold. Many members may be averse to living in larger buildings or simply to moving out for a number of years. Think of older members, for example, who are often concerned that they won't live long enough to see the reconstructed building. A morbid but all too real concern. The timelines for redevelopment can be a real challenge. The entire process could take close to a decade in most cases. Such long duration projects are inherently risky. This, of course, is an advantage for builders that are well-financed and well-reputed. Societies will understandably be averse to dealing with builders that are potentially a flight risk or that have not so great reputations. To deal with this issue, housing society members have the option to sell out to builders prior to the actual reconstruction of the building. Although arriving at a price at which such sales may be finalized is another concern. The government, as you can imagine, will be quite pleased with such redevelopment projects. Stamp duty collections, for instance, should increase dramatically as a result of all these redevelopment projects, primarily driven by the sale of new housing stock created and sellable by the developer. An increasing housing stock is useful and needed by a society when nuclear families are increasingly becoming the norm. Larger housing stock should hopefully, over time, make it much more affordable for young families to buy their own houses. Connected to this is the ongoing improvement in infrastructure, particularly connectivity driven by better roads and public transport. This will make more areas of the city attractive for redevelopment as commute times could shrink dramatically. Associated beneficiaries of this boom also exist, including real estate agents, property lawyers, and architects and interior designers. But which companies stand to profit from this boom? First and foremost, are companies involved in the actual reconstruction. There are builders of all sizes and reputations in Mumbai. Established and well thought of builders will be the biggest beneficiaries. Not only will societies be eager to minimize risk by working with well-reputed builders, but such builders will also have the all-important advantage of borrowing at lower rates. As a result, they can offer societies better deals or simply match other deals and make a greater profit. Remember the advantages of cluster developments that I was talking about earlier? Large established builders will disproportionately benefit from this, as they will have the balance sheets and financial wherewithal to manage such complex deals. Long-established companies like Godrej, Oberoi, Lodha, and the House of Hiranandani will undoubtedly play their part in this redevelopment of Mumbai. But relatively newer companies have also entered the fray in meaningful ways, most notably JSW. Contractors are also an interesting play on redevelopment. Builders contract other companies to actually build the structures. There are examples of such contractors in the listed space as well. The obvious one, of course, is L&T. But there are also smaller companies such as Ahluwalia and Capacity. The other obvious beneficiaries are companies involved with building materials. This includes pipes, cement, electrical equipment, water equipment, and more. There's a whole host of companies in the listed space, catering to various subsegments of this overall market. Companies within this space will enjoy varying degrees of success. But what is clear is that the overall size of the pie will increase dramatically. Of course, paints, tiles, lighting, bathroom fittings, all of these will benefit from the redevelopment boom as well. Not only will there be more houses that need products, but now each house, 1.5 times the original size, will need more of each product as well. Asian Paints, Kajaria, and other companies like them will be rubbing their hands in anticipation. There are also some less obvious companies that will be looking to gain from this potential boom. As nuclear families increasingly become the norm and move into their own houses, there will also be a concomitant increase in demand for air conditioners, televisions, microwaves, and other durable goods. Listed companies in this space include Whirlpool, Blue Star, Voltas, and many others. Large-scale redevelopment of Mumbai seems to be an inevitability. The advantages are fairly clear, but there are other points worth considering as well. For instance, the pollution caused by large-scale demolition and reconstruction of buildings across the city is only going to exacerbate existing health issues. Unfortunately, the sales of inhalers may also increase. The more direct challenge, though, is infrastructure. The idea that Mumbai will be covered with fancy, glittering high-rises is fantastic at first glance. But the question worth asking is, can it handle the change? Additionally, with so many families needing temporary accommodation, the stock of rental properties will also have to increase dramatically across the city. This is going to be challenging when so many buildings will simultaneously be constructed and reconstructed. Rents may very well skyrocket in certain areas of the city where redevelopment is particularly commonplace. Builders having to pay increasingly higher amounts to cover rent may prove to be a challenge over time. All of this activity is going to require more of everything. More water, more power, more gas, more labor. These things don't just magically spring up. They have to be provided for. If the island city has the capacity to provide, therefore, remains to be seen. Do you think Mumbai's infrastructure can handle the redevelopment boom? Thanks for watching.